Welcome to Cedar's Compass, where we explore the dynamic interplay between our inner landscape and our planet's ecology. Delve deep into the worlds of science, medicine, and philosophy as we discover the threads that weave us into the larger tapestry of life on Earth. People often talk about the microbiome, which is really the genetic background of all of the microorganisms that make up our ecosystem, including those that live in our bodies, including those that we talk about most, which live in our gastrointestinal system, right, that live in our gut. And the microbiota have this deep root in our system because obviously they came before us in evolutionary theory. And if you want more about this, I have another short video about this. You can take a look at that and get more information about this kind of evolutionary perspective. But because the microbes were here before we were, there's this idea that they organized themselves into communities and into structure. And those structures then that they created started to form some of what became the animal life, like that these things came together. We've seen how in the structure of a cell, we have this symbiotic relationship where at this point we think that the mitochondria, the powerhouse of our cells, was originally a individual bacteria that found a symbiotic relationship with another organism, and together they were able to create this much better synergy, this greater whole. And so in a similar way, as structures of microbiota communities and development grew, around them grew all kinds of, different forms of life. And I think it's really important to understand that they are not only essential, but we're built on them. We're built on the microbiota. Not only can we not survive without them, we wouldn't exist without them. And that's just so fundamental and so hard for a lot of people to understand, being like, I'm a human being, I'm this separate thing, and there's these separate other organisms that are different things outside of me. I don't see it that way, and I think a lot of my colleagues and friends don't see it that way either. We see it that life is all kinds of structures and communities built on top of each other to keep evolving levels and levels of consciousness, levels of awareness, levels of activity, levels of experience. And so I want to just go back to this idea of how important the microbiota are in this gut-brain axis relationship, because we talk about the gut-brain axis, and it's this very important relationship between our digestive system and our nervous system, and of course the brain. And so how does that work? And there's a huge field now, neurogastroenterology. It's a deep field and a deep study of the way that the interactions happen in the nervous system between the gut and the brain, and then through the pathways, the actual neural pathways that connect them. And so as we've looked into this deeply over the past 20 years, I'm sure it's a much deeper study for many people out there, but in these last 20 years that I've been really looking at it, what I've been able to see is that the microbiota hold this central role in the communication system between the tissues of our gut and then the brain, and then how we make meaning out of that. So this is back to this idea that there's digestion of life experience, that's the food, the chyme coming in, right? And then the microbiota interacting with that and changing it, altering it, because they're basically interacting with whatever we take in. And so that becomes the soil for those microbiota to grow in. And then their interactions with that soil create, the result, which is the metabolites, the breakdown products of whatever we took in, that then are worked on by our body at the level of this simple squamous epithelia, like or I should say simple columnar epithelia, the cells that line our intestine, that have all this surface area so that we can be exposed to these little bits and pieces that have come in, that have been acted on by our digestive system, and then acted on by the microbiota to prepare it for absorption into our body, into our bloodstream, so that we can then assimilate that into our whole endocrine, neuroendocrine system, our tissues everywhere. But so at that point of the interface between the microbiota and the nervous system, it's this really important, really critical place to understand how the microbiota influence what we think, how we feel. Because when you look at it, the signals that are moving through the nervous system are vastly moving from the gut to the brain, what are called afferent signals. They're going from the gut to the brain, not efferent signals, not going the other way, meaning that the information is going from our digestion up to the brain. And so in that process, what happens is a lot of the breakdown products of what we digest become metabolites that are then things like, the precursor to a neurotransmitter, like dopamine, the precursor to a neurotransmitter, like serotonin, right? Many of us know now that 95% of the serotonin in our bodies, in our nervous system, is made in the gut. At least 50% of it now is thought to be made, of our dopamine is thought to be made in the gut as well. And that's traveling up, as a neurotransmitter in the nervous system, right? Vagal, afferent nerve routes up to the brain. And what is that doing? Well, it's inducing changes in neural activity. And that's being interpreted in this large brain of ours, this 8 billion neurons, and then it's being, related to our previous experience and to what we've learned with our language and our science and our culture and our myth. And so we're putting it all together that way. But if we go back to this idea that we're built on these microbes, right? Imagine for a moment that the microbes as a whole, as an evolutionary part of developing a human biont, this organism that is composed of what we know now, it's like 10 times as much DNA in our bodies is bacterial DNA than is human DNA, right? We're built on it, okay? And so once we realize that and we understand that there's actually a mind that exists in the microbiota, and that it is influencing us, and our mind is built on it, it starts to become very apparent that what we feed our microbiota is going to have a huge impact on how we feel and how we think. And of course, we can reduce that quickly down to, well, what do I eat? Am I eating wheat or dairy or corn or soy or nuts or chips or seeds or popcorn? What are the things that I'm doing that might be disrupting my digestion? Well, yeah, that's a really simple way to think of it. I'm thinking of it in terms of, what about when we eat together? Like, imagine the microbiota population in our bodies. They are having an evolutionary experience. And so, we've come to this place where we kind of are in this like, ooh, we need to be kind of, aseptic, right? We want to like make a world that is like, it's like we want to create a world in which we control the microbes, so we use our antiseptics, we use our antibiotics, we use these things to kind of constantly push the microbes down because they're out of control. Rather than saying, oh, wow, they're all networked and they're a part of us. We're built on them. We need the right ones. We need to figure out how to have the right ones working for us, and the ones that are not working for us move along, right? How do we do that? But they're also having this dialogue and conversation, the microbes are, and they're influencing us. And when I see a group of people in Sardinia in a video, right, a blue zone, and they're all sitting together at a long table in this old like wooden stone house, and there's bottles of wine, and they're all sharing food together, and they're laughing, and they're telling stories, and they're remembering the great-great-grandfather who grew the greatest grapes in the world, and had this vintage, and we drank this wine, right? In that process, and they're sharing their glasses, and they're chinging together, and they're hugging, and they're kissing. What's happening with the microbiota right there? The microbiota are exchanging information. They're being passed through each other, back and forth. They're having a conversation and a dialogue. And you know what happens when people are together and they feel happy and they're eating good food? You know what they feel? They get a lot of serotonin developed in their bodies. So take this story and imagine these microbes that are really good at making serotonin are all making serotonin for me. I'm sitting at the table with my friends, and all I can think now with this influx of serotonin is, man, I just love you. You're so beautiful. I just really am so glad I'm here right now. And what I want to do, I'd love to ching our glasses together. I want to touch you and, man, give me a hug, like, oh, laugh, and we're sharing fluids, and it's all this mixture, right? And in that is this amazing confluence of DNA, of information that's evolving life, right? And so for me, that's so essential to understand that the microbes themselves are living, growing, pushing, and they're influencing us. And so when we want to change our micropopulation in our body to try and improve how we feel and what we're doing, I would like us to consider them, right? So like imagine, for example, here's another example. A person goes to work they're having a really hard time. They have a boss who's just, he's really hard on him, He's got liver stagnation and what we'd say in Taoist thought, where he's just kind of, he's like, his anger is not expressed. He doesn't really like his job. And so he kind of takes it out on some of his employees. And so he's always kind of on this person and just kind of grinding on him, boot on the neck kind of thing. So the person every day is just kind of like, oh, geez, this is hard. Like they go home, they get home and they're just feeling bad. But they've got a pattern of, they go to the freezer, get out the ice cream container, the carton, open the lid, and take a bite of ice cream. They swallow the ice cream, goes right down, and you know who gets that ice cream? The microbiota. And you know what? Certain microbiota love that ice cream. They love the sugar and the dairy and all the fats and the carbohydrates and all that comes through there. And those microbiota are like, oh man, this is great. We're gonna give this person a lot of dopamine. They make dopamine. It goes up the nervous system, afferent nerve fibers, right to the brain. This person's like, oh gosh, I'm so glad I had that ice cream. I feel so much better. You know what? My job kind of sucks. That guy really is hard for me, but it's okay because I feel good now. Now you have this pattern of, if I give the microbes this stuff, they'll give me the thing that makes me feel like I'm okay and I'm good. So this is a huge topic and one that I'd love to just dig into for hours with you. And I do have deep resources. I've done like a 5-hour intensive on the study of the gut-brain axis and the weaving of things and materials and herbs and nutrients, and it's all available. If you want to go deep, feel free. And for now, I just want to say thanks so much for being here and listening to this little, excerpt of my perspective on the microbiota and the gut-brain axis.